What if I told you that the empire we commonly refer to as the Holy Roman Empire was in fact neither holy nor Roman, nor an empire in the modern sense of the word? How could a 1,000-year political construct, so paradoxical in nature, become the cradle of modern Germany? What forces kept people speaking the same language divided into hundreds of principalities for over a millennium? As we embark on this journey through time, prepare to unravel the complexities of a fragmented realm that gave rise to one of the most powerful nations in contemporary history. Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. Imagine yourself in a world where loyalty belonged to your lord, your city, or your church, rather than an abstract notion of a nation. This was the landscape of the lands we now call Germany during the early Middle Ages, a time when the very idea of a national state seemed foreign and unfamiliar. These territories formed part of the vast heritage of the Empire of Charlemagne. Following the dissolution of his dominion in the year 843, as established by the Treaty of Verdun, the eastern portion of the Frankish lands, known as the East Frankish Kingdom, began to take shape, laying the groundwork for what would become Germany. Picture this era: dense oak and beech forests blanketing much of the land, sparse towns fortified by wooden walls, and roads, mostly remnants of the once great Roman infrastructure, fading into disrepair. The air is thick with the sense of smoke from hearths, freshly cut wood, and the damp earth. Mornings are shrouded in mist that hangs over rivers, veiling small settlements. The sound of church bells marks the passage of time, calling the faithful to prayer. While Latin still served as the language of the educated, daily conversation resonated with various dialects of Old High German, so divergent that a Bavarian would struggle to understand a Saxon. Contrary to popular belief, the Germanic peoples of this period were not merely warlike barbarians. Yes, martial prowess was respected, but they were also accomplished craftsmen, creating exquisite jewelry and mastering woodworking and bone carving. Their poetry and epic tales, passed down orally through generations, would later inspire the Nibelungenlied, a cornerstone of German epic literature. The political landscape of these lands was markedly different from modern states. Power was decentralized, divided among numerous local rulers, the dukes who presided over historical tribal duchies, Saxony, Franconia, Swabia, Bavaria, and Lorraine. These dukes acknowledged the nominal authority of a king, yet were, in effect, independent rulers, navigating a complex web of feudal obligations. This period saw the emergence of a system that later historians would term feudalism, though the people of that era had no such label for their reality. Society was organized around personal ties and mutual obligations, where a king granted lands to loyal vassals, who in turn distributed portions of their territories among their own followers. This web of personal relationships and commitments was one of the key reasons for the future fragmentation of Germany. Unlike nations such as France or England, where royal authority gradually strengthened, German kings struggled to establish a centralized administration. Instead, they were compelled to negotiate constantly with their powerful vassals, conceding more privileges in the process. Another critical factor shaping Germany's unique trajectory was the absence of natural boundaries to the east. In contrast to France, fortified by the Pyrenees, the Alps, and surrounding seas, the eastern frontiers of the German lands were open to migration and expansion. This situation created both opportunities and threats. German rulers could extend their territories eastward, but they also had to remain vigilant against incursions. It is crucial to grasp that during this time, the concept of Germany, as we understand it today, did not exist. People primarily identified with their tribe or region, such as the Saxons, Bavarians, or Swabians, rather than as Germans. Gradually, the term Regnum Teutonicum, or the Kingdom of the Teutons, began to be used to describe all East Frankish lands. However, a unified German identity took a long time to develop. In the year 919, a pivotal event unfolded that would shape the destiny of the German lands for centuries to come. With the decline of the Carolingian dynasty, the German nobility elected Henry the Fowler, the Duke of Saxony, as king. This marked the first instance of a king who did not belong to the Carolingian lineage. His election signified the dawn of a new era, the emergence of a distinctly German statehood, independent from Frankish heritage. Henry's son, Otto the Great, would go even further, defeating the Magyars at the Battle of Lechfeld in the year 955. This victory not only safeguarded the eastern borders, but also elevated his prestige, allowing him to lay claim to the imperial title. In the year 962, the Pope crowned him as emperor. Thus, a new empire emerged, which would later be dubbed the Holy Roman Empire. This coronation had far-reaching implications. Otto and his successors considered themselves the rightful heirs of the Roman Empire and Charlemagne. They asserted their supremacy not only over the German lands, but also over Italy and, nominally, over the entire Christian world. This aspiration for a universal empire shaped the foreign policy of German rulers for centuries, and was one of the reasons they failed to create a centralized national state. The Empire of Otto was not a nation-state in the modern sense. It was an over-national entity encompassing various peoples, speaking different languages and holding diverse traditions. It represented a political embodiment of the medieval ideal of a universal Christian world, where the emperor and the pope shared supreme authority, one in the realm of the worldly, the other in the spiritual. In this complex system, the King of Germany automatically became a candidate for the imperial throne, with papal coronation in Rome serving as the sole requirement for official recognition. Therefore, understanding German history is inherently tied to the context of the Holy Roman Empire and the intricate relationships between emperors and the papacy. Thus began the long and convoluted saga of the German lands within the framework of the Holy Roman Empire, a narrative filled with paradoxes and contradictions. It was a history of a territory destined to become the heart of Europe, taking 1,000 years to evolve into a unified state. As we delve deeper into this tale, we will witness the evolving landscape of Germany, from its fragmented origins to the powerful industrial state that would reshape Europe and the world. The 11th century would bring new challenges and transformations to the Germanic realm, particularly under the reign of the Salian emperors. What happens when the emperor kneels in the snow for 3 days? How does a single act of humiliation redefine the balance of power between church and state? And what legacy did Frederick I, known as Barbarossa, leave behind, blending chivalry with political ambition? These questions take us deep into a pivotal era of German history, where the seeds of feudal fragmentation were sown, setting the stage for centuries of political turmoil. During the reign of Henry III, the German Empire reached the zenith of its power, but this glory was disturbingly fragile. It would soon be shaken by one of the most significant conflicts of the Middle Ages. Henry famously stood barefoot in the snow for 3 long days outside the castle of Canossa, where Pope Gregory VII was staying, pleading for forgiveness and the lifting of his excommunication. This act of submission, known as the Walk to Canossa, became a powerful symbol of the strained relationship between secular and ecclesiastical authority. While Henry achieved a temporary reconciliation, the struggle with the papacy persisted even after his reign, culminating in the Concordat of Worms in the year 1122. This pivotal agreement allowed the emperor to maintain influence over the election of church officials while recognizing their spiritual loyalty to the pope. The prolonged conflict had serious implications for the governance of the German lands. Emperors found themselves compelled to make concessions to German princes in a bid to secure their support against the papacy. These princes seized the opportunity to bolster their own autonomy, laying the groundwork for the feudal disintegration that would characterize German territories for centuries to come. The situation was further complicated when the Salian dynasty came to an end in the year 1125. German princes opted for Lothar of Saxony as their king, followed by Conrad III from the Hohenstaufen dynasty. These elections established a crucial precedent. The crown of Germany became elective rather than hereditary. The princes who participated in these elections gradually formed a distinct group known as the electors, whose power within their own realms grew nearly unchecked. Meanwhile, the daily life of the people in the German territories underwent transformative changes. The 12th century was a period marked by significant economic and demographic growth. Forests were cleared, swamps drained, and new villages and towns emerged. The colonization of eastern lands, previously inhabited by Slavic peoples, expanded the boundaries of the Germanic world. Towns, initially established as fortified outposts or residences for bishops, began to evolve into vibrant centers of craftsmanship and trade. The clang of hammers in workshops, the creaking of carts on narrow streets, and the shouts of merchants in bustling market squares formed the soundtrack of these burgeoning urban centers. The air was thick with the scents of tanned leather, freshly baked bread, and the smoke from countless hearths. It is crucial to understand that cities in medieval Germany represented a unique world with their own set of laws and privileges. Citizens or burghers fought for self-governance, a right enshrined in city charters. "City air makes one free," declared a popular saying of the time. A serf who lived in the city for a year and a day would gain his freedom. During this period, cities began to band together in leagues to safeguard their interests. The most famous of these alliances was the Hanseatic League, a commercial union of northern German cities that controlled trade across the Baltic and North Seas. From London to Novgorod, Hanseatic merchants established their trading posts, creating a web of economic connections that often proved stronger than political ties. In cultural terms, the 12th century heralded a flourishing of chivalric culture, exemplified by the emergence of Minnesang, or German courtly lyric poetry. In the castles of German nobles, songs celebrating love and heroism echoed, producing works that would enter the treasury of world literature. Walter von der Vogelweide, the greatest of the Minnesingers, sang not only of his beloved, but also of a cherished Germany, marking one of the earliest expressions of a nascent national sentiment. On the political stage, the Hohenstaufen era, particularly during the rule of Frederick I Barbarossa from the year 1152 to 1190, was marked by renewed efforts to strengthen imperial authority. Barbarossa, a near-mythical figure in German historical memory, combined knightly valor with political acumen, aiming to restore the empire's prestige and the emperor's real power. His approach was twofold. In Italy, he sought to establish direct imperial control, resulting in prolonged conflicts with Lombard cities and the papacy. In Germany, he employed a more flexible strategy, aiming not to suppress, but to win over princes, especially spiritual ones like bishops and abbots, who could serve as reliable pillars of imperial strength. One of the most dramatic moments of his reign was the destruction of Milan in the year 1162. Imagine the smoke rising above the walls of a once thriving city, the crackling of flames consuming homes and churches, and the cries of residents losing everything they owned. This act was both a display of imperial power and a testament to the fragility of that power. Just a few years later, the citizens of Milan returned and rebuilt their city, demonstrating resilience in the face of adversity. Even more legendary was Barbarossa's death during the Third Crusade. In the year 1190, while crossing the Salif River in Asia Minor, the emperor drowned. His body was never recovered, giving rise to the legend that he did not truly die, but instead sleeps in the Kyffhäuser mountain, waiting to awaken in Germany's hour of greatest need. Barbarossa's son, Henry VI, briefly unified under his rule Germany and the Kingdom of Sicily, creating an empire that encompassed much of Central and Southern Europe. However, his untimely death in the minority of his son Frederick led to a new crisis, and a struggle for the throne between Philip of Swabia and Otto of Brunswick. This conflict, which the Pope Innocent III actively intervened in, further weakened central authority in Germany. The princes, aligning themselves with one candidate or the other, sought new privileges that would only deepen the divides in the realm. In the year 1212, the future Emperor Frederick II issued the Golden Bull of Vienne, which granted spiritual princes extensive rights within their territories. As Frederick II finally solidified his position on the throne, he chose to focus his efforts on Italy and Sicily, leaving Germany under the governance of his son Henry. This decision led to further decentralization, with princes gaining nearly unrestricted power in their lands, while the emperor increasingly became a mere nominal sovereign. Ironically, Frederick II, a figure contemporaries dubbed the marvel of the world for his diverse talents and intellect, inadvertently contributed to the decline of imperial authority in Germany. By prioritizing the establishment of a centralized state in Sicily, he effectively left the German princes to their own devices. In the year 1235, Frederick issued a statute in Worms that legally solidified the princes' autonomy, granting them the right to mint coins, build castles, levy taxes, and adjudicate their subjects. This effectively legalized the feudal fragmentation that had existed before as a matter of practice rather than recognized legal status. This was an era when, in the absence of a strong central authority, regional dynasties flourished. The Wettins in Saxony, the Wittelsbachs in Bavaria, and the Ascanian dynasty in Brandenburg expanded their domains, constructed fortified castles, founded towns, and supported churches and monasteries. Their rivalries and alliances shaped the political landscape of Germany. Simultaneously, German expansion to the east, known as Ostsiedlung, continued. German settlers moved into lands east of the Elbe, bringing with them advanced agricultural techniques, crafts, and urban culture, further weaving the complex tapestry of German history. What drove Rudolf von Habsburg to shift his focus from the universal empire aspirations of the Hohenstaufen dynasty to cementing his power in Austria? How did the architectural marvels of medieval Germany echo the social transformations of the time? And what ignited the spark of the Reformation, transforming not just Germany, but the entire Christian world? The journey of the Holy Roman Empire during the 13th century was marked by significant upheaval and grandeur. As pilgrims flocked to the Holy Land, the attention of leaders turned toward the pagan territories of the Prussians, initiating both conquest and Christianization. This period was not just a time of warfare, it was an era of monumental construction. Across Germany, magnificent cathedrals in the burgeoning Gothic style emerged, with the Cologne Cathedral, founded in 1248, standing as a testament to the architectural ambitions of the time. In 1273, the electors chose Rudolf of Habsburg as emperor, marking the dawn of a new chapter in German and European history that would reverberate for 6 centuries. Unlike his predecessors who envisioned a universal empire, Rudolf focused on strengthening his hereditary holdings in Austria. This strategic shift initiated a dualism in the empire, where the emperor served both as the head of the empire and as the sovereign of his own lands. This dualistic nature would become a defining characteristic of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. The 13th and 14th centuries were also periods of deep social and economic transformation. Cities began to play an increasingly pivotal role, notably those granted imperial status, which were directly accountable to the emperor rather than local princes. Nuremberg, Augsburg, Frankfurt, and Lübeck blossomed into bustling centers of crafts, trade, and culture. The streets of these cities buzzed with merchants from diverse lands, where various languages intertwined, and exotic goods, from silks of China to spices of India and furs from Russia, were readily displayed. The rhythmic clatter of looms from cloth workshops, the metallic clang of blacksmiths, and the cries of town criers announcing new city council decrees painted a vibrant picture of urban life. These cities evolved into hubs of a burgeoning bourgeois culture, distinct from the chivalric traditions of the past. While knightly literature celebrated heroic feats and courtly love, urban narratives took a more practical turn, often laced with satire. Guilds of craftsmen and merchant associations flourished, laying the groundwork for urban self-governance. In 1356, Emperor Charles IV issued the Golden Bull, a document that would define the political landscape of the empire for centuries to come. This edict solidified the right of the 7 electors to choose the emperor, endowing them with nearly sovereign rights within their territories. The empire was effectively transforming into a federation of largely independent principalities and cities under the nominal authority of an elected emperor. Charles, hailing from the Luxembourg dynasty, made Prague the epicenter of his power, elevating it to one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. It was during his reign that the first university in Central Europe was established. The iconic Charles Bridge was built over the Poltava River, and Prague Castle was expanded. The Gothic style reached its zenith in both architecture and art during this time. Yet, while the cultural landscape flourished, the political arena continued to fragment. The empire increasingly resembled a complex mosaic of territories with varying statuses and legal systems, comprising not just electorates, but also other principalities, ecclesiastical territories, imperial towns, knightly lands, and even isolated villages directly subject to the emperor. This political fragmentation had its advantages. In the absence of a strong central authority, cultural and economic pluralism thrived. Each prince sought to embellish their capital, establish universities, and attract scholars and artists to their courts. Consequently, multiple centers of culture and education sprang up, rather than a single dominating capital. However, the 14th century also brought significant challenges, particularly in the form of the Black Death, a devastating plague that ravaged Europe between 1348 and 1350. This catastrophe claimed the lives of approximately 1/3 of the population. Urban centers, with their overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, suffered especially severe losses. One can only imagine the harrowing atmosphere of a city gripped by the epidemic, streets littered with unburied corpses, the smoke of funeral pyres filling the air, and religious fanatics, known as flagellants, marching in hopes of averting divine wrath. Distrust and fear ran rampant among neighbors, with Jews being scapegoated for allegedly poisoning wells, leading to horrific pogroms. The aftermath of the plague had far-reaching social and economic effects. The drastic reduction in population resulted in a labor shortage, which, in turn, improved the conditions for peasants and urban workers. Feudal lords, desperate to retain their labor force, were compelled to offer more favorable terms to retain their peasants. In cities, the wages of craftsmen and apprentices began to rise. As the 14th century drew to a close and the 15th century began, the empire underwent yet another transformation. Following the end of the Luxembourg dynasty, the imperial crown passed to the Habsburgs, who would intermittently hold it until the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire in 1866. This Habsburg era coincided with the advent of the Renaissance and humanism in Germany. The advent of printing, pioneered by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century, revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge. Books, once the privilege of a select few, became accessible to a much broader audience. It's essential to recognize that Gutenberg's invention was not merely a technical innovation. It signaled a cultural revolution comparable to the impact of the Internet in contemporary times. The book transitioned from a luxury item to a vital tool for the mass distribution of ideas. Without Gutenberg's press, the Reformation and the scientific revolutions of subsequent centuries would have been unthinkable. The sounds of printing presses in the workshops of early publishers, the scent of fresh ink, and the sight of neatly stacked printed sheets became part of the cultural fabric of German cities. Along with these new sensations, fresh ideas began to spread. Critical thinking towards authority, an interest in classical antiquity, and a desire to return to the original sources of Christian faith. The late 15th and early 16th centuries were marked by profound contradictions and tensions within German society. On one hand, it was a period of economic growth, especially in southern German cities like Augsburg and Nuremberg, where trading houses like the Fugger and Welser families controlled substantial portions of European trade and finance. Artists like Albrecht Dürer were creating timeless engravings and paintings, while humanists such as Johann Reuchlin and Ulrich von Hutten advanced new educational and cultural ideals. On the other hand, social discontent was mounting. Peasants bore the brunt of rising feudal obligations and restrictions on traditional rights to communal forests and pastures. In cities, there was growing resentment against the patriciate, a narrow circle of wealthy families that monopolized power. Public outrage erupted over church abuses, including the sale of indulgences and the accumulation of vast wealth by ecclesiastical hierarchs, alongside the moral decay found in parts of the clergy. This volatile atmosphere reached a boiling point with an event that would change not only Germany, but the entire Christian world, the Reformation. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther, a professor of theology at the University of Wittenberg, is said to have nailed his famous 95 Theses against the sale of indulgences to the door of the castle church. Although modern historians debate the literal accuracy of this act, its symbolic significance cannot be overstated. This marked the first step toward the fracture of the unity of Western Christianity, which had endured for over a millennium. Luther's original intention was not to establish a new church, but to reform the existing one, advocating a return to the roots of Christianity. However, the inevitable conflict with the papacy set the stage for a seismic shift in religious and social dynamics across Europe. What happens when a monk defies the authority of the Pope? How did Martin Luther's radical ideas lead to the bloodiest conflict in German history? And what role did a seemingly minor event in Prague play in igniting the flames of the 30 Years' War? These are just a few questions that unveil the dramatic saga of the Reformation and its catastrophic aftermath. Imagine a small university town, Wittenberg in Saxony, where narrow streets meander towards a bustling marketplace, lined with modest homes of the townsfolk. In this setting, a young monk named Martin Luther began his journey of faith, deeply dissatisfied with the corruption and excesses of the Catholic Church. He famously rejected papal authority and church traditions, boldly declaring the principle of sola scriptura, meaning that only Scripture could serve as the source of religious truth. This radical stance denied the Church a mediating role between God and man, asserting instead that a believer could achieve direct access to the divine through faith, encapsulated in the term sola fide. The Reformation, ignited by Luther's provocative ideas, won support from various societal strata in Germany, but for different and often conflicting reasons. The princes and nobles saw an opportunity to liberate themselves from papal influence and to secularize church lands, which would significantly enhance their power and wealth. Meanwhile, the townspeople welcomed the simplification of religious practices and the reduction of ecclesiastical taxes that often burdened them. Even the peasants interpreted Luther's call for Christian freedom as a mandate to rise against feudal oppression. Such varying interpretations of the Reformation inevitably led to a crisis point, culminating in the Peasants' War of 1524 to 1525, the largest popular uprising in German history up to that time. Under the leadership of figures like Thomas Müntzer, the peasants demanded not only religious freedoms but also social reforms. Initially sympathetic to their plight, Luther quickly reversed his stance when the movement turned violent. In a pamphlet denouncing the so-called banditry of the peasant revolts, he urged the princes to suppress the uprising with ruthless force. The rebellion was crushed, resulting in the deaths of approximately 100,000 peasants, marking a tragic chapter in the history of the Reformation and revealing a profound schism within the movement itself. While radical reformers like the Anabaptists pushed for far-reaching social and political changes, more moderate figures like Philip Melanchthon sought to find common ground with Catholic authorities. Concurrently, leaders such as Ulrich Zwingli in Zurich and later John Calvin in Geneva developed their own distinct versions of reform that diverged from Lutheranism. The reaction of Emperor Charles V to this burgeoning movement was multifaceted. As the defender of the Catholic Church and a loyal son of the Pope, he felt compelled to combat the spread of heresy. However, as the emperor concerned with the unity of the Holy Roman Empire, he also had to pursue compromise with the Protestant princes. Diverted by the ongoing conflicts with the Ottoman Empire and rivalry with France, Charles initially failed to suppress the Reformation by force. It wasn't until the Peace of Augsburg in 1555 that a tentative resolution was reached, establishing the principle of cuius regio, eius religio, whose realm, his religion. This allowed each prince to determine whether Catholicism or Lutheranism would prevail in their territories, granting dissenters the right to emigrate if they disagreed with their ruler's choice. Although this compromise temporarily eased tensions, it did not resolve the underlying issues. Calvinism, gaining traction especially in the western parts of the empire, remained unrecognized. Furthermore, the secularization of church lands by Protestant princes continued to be a contentious issue. The religious divide exacerbated the political fragmentation within Germany, leading Protestant and Catholic principalities to form separate alliances, often with foreign powers. the empire increasingly transformed into a battleground of international rivalry. By the early 17th century, tensions between Catholics and Protestants escalated once again, fueled by disputes over church lands, the rights of Protestants to build places of worship in Catholic territories, and the status of imperial cities with mixed confessional populations. Both sides formed military-political coalitions, the Catholic League and the Protestant Union. The spark that ignited this volatile situation came from Bohemia. In 1618, the infamous defenestration of Prague occurred when two imperial representatives were thrown out of a window of the royal palace. This dramatic act triggered a revolt by Czech Protestants against the Catholic Habsburg authority, which quickly escalated into a broader European conflict known as the 30 Years' War. This war would go on to become the most devastating conflict in German history until the 20th century. Originally a religious struggle between Catholics and Protestants within the empire, the 30 Years' War transformed into a complex international war involving virtually all European powers. France, nominally Catholic, supported the German Protestants against the Habsburgs, while Sweden entered the fray as a defender of Protestantism, pursuing its own political ambitions in the Baltic region. Picture the German lands during these harrowing years. Armies from various nations ravaging towns and villages, leaving behind a landscape of destruction and death. Soldiers, often months overdue on pay, resorted to plundering local populations for sustenance. Crops went unharvested, trade ground to a halt, and crafts fell into decline. Starvation and epidemics claimed more lives than the direct consequences of warfare. One of the most terrifying periods of the conflict arose under the command of Albrecht von Wallenstein, a talented yet ruthless military leader. His army, numbering as many as 100,000 men, sustained itself through systematic looting of the territories it traversed. Wallenstein's principle, war feeds war, resulted in untold suffering for the civilian population. A particularly grim episode was the sacking of Magdeburg in 1631, a prosperous trading city that was razed to the ground. Out of a population of 30,000, around 20,000 residents were killed. Contemporary observers bitterly dubbed this tragedy the Magdeburg Wedding, marking it as one of the darkest moments of the 30 Years' War. After more than 2 decades of catastrophic battles, neither side could claim a decisive victory. Exhausted resources and a collective weariness of war prompted the initiation of peace negotiations, culminating in the signing of the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. This treaty held monumental significance, not only for Germany, but also for the entire framework of international relations in Europe. It recognized the sovereignty of all participating states, irrespective of their size or power, and established a principle of non-interference in each other's internal affairs. These tenets would lay the groundwork for modern international law. For the Holy Roman Empire and the German nation, the Peace of Westphalia marked the final cementing of its decentralized nature. Princes were granted the right to form alliances with foreign powers, with the stipulation that these alliances should not be directed against the emperor. Calvinism was acknowledged alongside Catholicism and Lutheranism, while Switzerland and the Netherlands officially exited the empire. Significant territorial changes also took place, with France acquiring a large portion of Alsace, Sweden obtaining parts of Pomerania and several ports on the Baltic Sea, and Brandenburg securing eastern Pomerania and other territories, setting the stage for its rise as one of the leading German powers. The human and material losses for Germany during the 30 Years' War were staggering. Estimates suggest that between 20 and 40% of the population perished, marking an unprecedented demographic catastrophe. Numerous cities and villages lay in ruins, while trade and crafts fell into a state of decline. It would take several generations for the economy and population levels to recover to pre-war conditions. Politically, the outcome of the war further weakened central imperial authority and intensified the sense of particularism, with the empire increasingly resembling a loose federation of effectively independent states. What if I told you that a single monarch, known as the Great Elector, transformed a fragmented region into a significant European power? How did figures like Friedrich II and Samuel Fundorf navigate a landscape where beauty and poverty coexisted side by side? And what dark practices did some rulers employ to maintain their lavish lifestyles while their subjects endured hardship? These questions call us to explore a pivotal moment in German history that shaped the course of the nation. In the wake of the 30 Years' War, the German lands presented a patchwork of states, some flourishing while others seemed like monstrous aberrations. Historian Samuel Fundorf described this situation as a body that was irregular and monstrous, a reflection of the chaotic political landscape. Amidst this turmoil, certain German states began to find strength and centralization. A prime example was Brandenburg, Prussia, where the Elector Friedrich Wilhelm, famously known as the Great Elector, laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the Kingdom of Prussia. His vision included the creation of a professional army, administrative reforms that streamlined governance, and economic initiatives that spurred development. Not to forget, he pursued a cautious but effective foreign policy that gradually elevated Prussia's standing among the European powers. Austria, under the influence of the Habsburg dynasty, remained another formidable force in the region. In the aftermath of the 30 Years' War, Austrian princes took inspiration from the grandeur of Louis XIV's France, constructing opulent palaces in the extravagant Baroque style. They established royal theaters and orchestras, founded academic institutions, and raised universities, all while Versailles served as the quintessential model for many German residences. From the majestic Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna to the humbler imitations scattered throughout smaller principalities, these architectural ensembles stood as a testament to the wealth and aspirations of their rulers. Imagine these magnificent palaces featuring symmetrical facades, meticulously designed gardens adorned with fountains and statues, greenhouses filled with exotic plants, and grand halls embellished with mirrors and gold leaf. Within the confines of this splendor, a complex dance of courtly life unfolded, a stark contrast to the often dire circumstances faced by the common people. Many German rulers, especially in the smaller principalities, imposed exorbitant taxes on their subjects to support their extravagant lifestyles. A particularly troubling trend was the sale of their own citizens as soldiers to foreign powers. For instance, the Landgraves of Hesse supplied troops to Britain for quelling the American Revolution, raising ethical questions about their priorities. However, not all German leaders succumbed to the temptations of extravagance. Many were guided by the principles of enlightened absolutism, a philosophy suggesting that a monarch should act as the state's chief servant, dedicated to the well-being of their subjects. One of the most prominent figures advocating for this enlightened approach was Friedrich II, the great King of Prussia. Ascending to the throne in the year 1740, he transformed Prussia into a major European powerhouse. Friedrich was not merely a skilled military strategist and statesman. He was also an intellectual, philosopher, and musician. His correspondence with luminaries like Voltaire exemplified the cross-pollination of ideas during this era. Under his reign, Prussia evolved into a state where the military, bureaucracy, and economy worked in concert. He implemented judicial reforms, abolished torture, championed religious tolerance, and promoted education and scientific advancement. Simultaneously, Friedrich pursued an aggressive foreign policy that expanded Prussia's territory, notably through the acquisition of Silesia from Austria and Polish lands acquired during the partitions of Poland. Culturally, the 18th century marked a remarkable renaissance for Germany. This was a time when German philosophy, literature, and music gained recognition on the world stage. In Königsberg, the philosopher Immanuel Kant was developing his critical philosophy, which would alter the course of European thought. Literary giants such as Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Friedrich Schiller were producing works that would become classics in the global literary canon. Composers like Johann Sebastian Bach, Georg Friedrich Handel, and later Joseph Haydn and the young Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart were creating music of unparalleled beauty and depth. The German Enlightenment, however, had its unique characteristics that distinguished it from its French or English counterparts. It was less radical in political terms and more focused on moral, educational, and cultural issues, rather than advocating for revolutionary societal change. German Enlightenment thinkers often aligned themselves with absolutist monarchs rather than challenging them. A significant factor contributing to cultural development was the rise in education. Throughout the 18th century, new universities, such as Göttingen, were established as centers for historical science and philology. The network of gymnasiums providing classical education expanded, literacy rates increased, and the fields of publishing and journalism flourished. What made German cultural life particularly interesting was its decentralized nature. Unlike France, where intellectual forces gravitated around Paris, or England, where London reigned supreme, Germany boasted a multitude of cultural hubs. Cities like Berlin, Vienna, Weimar, Hamburg, Leipzig, and Dresden each offered a unique cultural atmosphere. Take Weimar, for example, a small ducal residence in Saxony-Weimar. Thanks to the patronage of the enlightened Duchess Anna Amalia and her son Karl August, this modest town became one of Germany's foremost cultural centers. Esteemed figures such as Goethe, Schiller, Herder, and Wieland called it home during this vibrant period. Picture Weimar at the close of the 18th century. Quiet streets lined with neat houses, a park along the banks of the Ilm River where Goethe loved to stroll, and a ducal library rich with book collections. Bustling salons where intellectuals and aristocrats gathered to discuss the latest ideas in philosophy, science, and art. It was here, in an atmosphere blending courtly splendor with bourgeois comfort, that a new German culture was taking shape. Yet, this idyllic scene was set against a backdrop of profound social and economic contradictions. The majority of the population in the German lands comprised peasants, many of whom remained serfs, especially in the eastern regions. They bore the heavy burden of labor obligations and taxes, suffering under the caprices of the nobility. Urban populations, particularly in smaller towns, often lived in poverty, and artisans faced competition from the emerging industrial sector. Economically, Germany lagged behind both England and even France. The Industrial Revolution, which had already transformed Britain, was only beginning to touch the German territories. Trade was hindered by numerous internal customs barriers and the disparity of currency systems across different states. The absence of a unified national market significantly stunted economic growth. However, in certain regions, particularly in the Rhineland, Saxony, and Silesia, the seeds of industrialization were being sown. Factories began to emerge, and the extraction of coal and metals surged. New social classes were forming: industrialists and factory workers who would play an increasingly important role in Germany's future history. By the end of the 18th century, the political landscape of Germany resembled an extraordinarily intricate mosaic. The Holy Roman Empire of the German nation nominally united approximately 300 sovereign territories, ranging from substantial states like Austria and Prussia to minuscule holdings ruled by imperial knights, sometimes encompassing just a few villages. This political fragmentation served as both a catalyst for cultural diversity and a barrier to economic and political progress. Externally, the system appeared stable. The emperor, who had been Joseph II of Habsburg since 1765, presided over the Reichstag, the imperial diet in Regensburg. The imperial chamber court in Wetzlar resolved disputes among the imperial estates. The archaic institutions of the empire continued to function out of inertia, albeit with diminishing effectiveness. Yet this stability was deceptive. Growing tensions between Austria and Prussia, the rise of national consciousness, and the spread of revolutionary ideas all began to undermine the foundations of the old order. It was only a matter of time before an external catalyst would set in motion processes that would ultimately lead to the radical transformation of the German world. What if I told you that the ideas of freedom and equality ignited a revolution that would reshape nations? How did thinkers like Immanuel Kant and poets like Friedrich Schiller react to the chaos of the French Revolution? And what profound changes did this turmoil unleash across the German states, including the ambitions of young Hegel? The catalyst for this sweeping transformation was none other than the Great French Revolution, which began in the year 1789. Initially, many German intellectuals greeted it as the dawn of a new era filled with liberty and equality. Immanuel Kant, despite his advanced age, eagerly followed the developments across the Rhine. Friedrich Schiller was honored as a distinguished citizen of the French Republic. In Tübingen University, a youthful Hegel and his companions planted a tree of freedom in homage to the revolution. Yet, as the revolution grew more radical, particularly with the onset of the Jacobin Terror, perceptions shifted dramatically in Germany. Conservative circles had always harbored a hostile view, but now even many liberals began to feel disillusioned with the revolutionary ideals they once embraced. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who initially sympathized with the revolution, became increasingly jaded following the Battle of Valmy in 1792. He remarked on the profound shift, noting that it was here that glory clashed with the crushing defeats inflicted upon its adversaries. By the year 1805, after the decisive defeat of the Austrian army at Austerlitz and the Prussian army at Jena and Auerstedt the following year, Napoleon emerged as the de facto ruler of Central Europe. He dramatically redrew the political map of Germany. In 1806, the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, which had endured for more than 8 centuries, ceased to exist. The last emperor, Francis II, relinquished his imperial crown, bowing to Napoleon's ultimatum. In place of numerous small states, Napoleon established larger political entities, many of which were consolidated into the Rhine Confederation under his patronage. The number of independent German states dwindled from over 300 to just 39. The diminutive territories of imperial knights and ecclesiastical principalities were dissolved, and church lands underwent secularization. These sweeping changes carried a dual significance. On one hand, they were imposed by a foreign conqueror and accompanied by national humiliation, military tributes, and mandatory military service for Napoleon's wars. On the other hand, they objectively cleared the path for the modernization of German lands, dismantling feudal barriers and assembling larger economic and administrative units. The most profound transformations occurred in the Western German territories, which were directly adjacent to France or even incorporated into it. Here, French legal norms were introduced, including the Napoleonic Civil Code, which abolished feudal privileges, established equality before the law, and encouraged entrepreneurial freedom. Many of these innovations persisted long after Napoleon's fall. Picture a Rhineland city of the time. French officials in their distinctive uniforms issuing decrees in the French language, new courts operating under novel legal norms, German burghers learning French to adapt to their new reality, shop signs displayed in both languages, and French military patrols patrolling the streets. German recruits were sent off to war as part of the Napoleonic army. This was a world where the old and the new, the German and the French, coercion and modernization intertwined in a complex tapestry. Yet, the most significant transformation wrought by the Napoleonic Wars was the awakening of national consciousness. Previously, most inhabitants of the German territories identified primarily with their immediate state, be it Prussians, Bavarians, or Saxons. However, a growing awareness of a common German identity began to take root. The shared humiliation and collective struggle for liberation became powerful factors in the formation of national unity. This process was particularly evident in Prussia, which, after its devastating defeat at Jena and Auerstedt, lost nearly half of its territory and was compelled to host French occupying troops. In response to these dire circumstances, the Prussian leadership, notably Ministers Stein and Hardenberg, initiated a series of profound reforms, aimed not only at modernizing the Prussian state, but also at laying the groundwork for its future role in the unification of Germany. Serfdom and hereditary occupational restrictions were abolished. Military and educational reforms were enacted, and local self-governance was introduced in cities. One of the most crucial reforms was the military overhaul led by Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, which established a system of universal military conscription, enhanced officer training, and improved armaments. These measures transformed the Prussian army into one of the most effective military forces of its time. Alongside these official reforms, a patriotic movement began to flourish, particularly in academic circles. Philosophers like Johann Gottlieb Fichte and Friedrich Schleiermacher, as well as writers such as Heinrich von Kleist, called for national revival and resistance against French dominion. Secret societies like the Tugendbund and the League of Virtue emerged, preparing public sentiment for a war of liberation. The foundation of the University of Berlin in 1810 played a pivotal role in this transformation. Wilhelm von Humboldt, its founder, developed principles of higher education that integrated teaching with research, profoundly influencing the evolution of academia worldwide. The University of Berlin became not just a center of scholarship but also an ideological hub for Prussian and, later, German Renaissance. When, in 1813, after Napoleon's catastrophic defeat in Russia, Prussia joined the anti-French coalition, it was perceived as the beginning of the war for national liberation. The call to arms by King Friedrich Wilhelm III stirred an unprecedented wave of patriotism. Thousands of volunteers rushed to enlist in the army. Women donated their jewelry for military needs, and poets composed stirring patriotic hymns. At the Battle of Nations near Leipzig in October 1813, united forces of Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden delivered a decisive blow to Napoleon on German soil. Goethe, observing the conflict from a distance, famously remarked, "From these graves will arise the freedom of nations." Indeed, the war for liberation became a crucial factor in shaping German national consciousness and laid the foundation for future unification. After Napoleon's final defeat in 1815, the Congress of Vienna revised the political map of Europe, particularly in Germany. The extinguished Holy Roman Empire was replaced by the German Confederation, a union of 39 independent German states. Over time, this number dwindled to 35. Both Austria and Prussia were included, with Austria presiding over the Federal Assembly that convened in Frankfurt am Main. The German Confederation was primarily established as a defensive alliance, ensuring the security of its members. It lacked a common constitution, citizenship, or unified economic policy. Most issues were addressed at the level of individual states. Nevertheless, its existence acknowledged the fact that the German states formed a distinctive community within the European framework. The period following the Congress of Vienna, known as the Age of Restoration, marked a time of conservative reaction. Under the direction of Austrian Chancellor Metternich, liberal and national movements were suppressed across the German states. The Carlsbad Decrees of 1819 imposed strict censorship, outlawed student associations, and established surveillance over universities. Many liberal professors were dismissed, and some patriotic figures were forced into exile. However, despite this political backlash, the 1920s and 30s ushered in significant economic and social changes. Industrialization began to take root, particularly in textiles and metallurgy. The first railways were constructed, with the Nuremberg-Fürth line opening in 1835, heralding a new era for the German states. What happens when a king refuses a crown because he believes it should not be given by the people? How did a conservative politician become the architect of a united Germany? And what sparked the fiery national movements that changed the course of a continent? Join me as we unravel this tumultuous chapter in history. The formation of the German Customs Union was a pivotal moment, uniting most German states, excluding Austria, into a single economic entity. Envision the era of early industrialization. Smoke billows from the chimneys of the first factories, rising above storied cities that have stood for centuries. Steamships begin to navigate the Rhine and Elbe rivers, while the first locomotives, terrifying the horses that once ruled the roads, speed across the newly laid tracks. In urban areas, gaslighting illuminates the streets, signaling a significant shift from rural to industrial living as waves of people migrate from the countryside to bustling industrial centers. This was a transformative time, as society transitioned from agrarian norms to industrial capitalism, moving away from feudal relationships toward a new economic order. Simultaneously, this economic upheaval triggered profound cultural changes. In literature, the strictures of classicism and the romantic ideals that preceded it gave way to realism, championed by writers like Georg Büchner and the young Heinrich Heine. The prevailing philosophical doctrine of Hegelianism, which dominated the early 19th century, saw a schism between conservative old Hegelians and radical young Hegelians who sought to expand citizens' political rights. Yet, these profound changes largely failed to disrupt the fundamental political structure of society. As the national movement began to swell, especially after the looming threat of war with France in the year 1840 prompted a powerful wave of patriotism, the sentiment for unity became more pronounced. The popular song Sachsenlied and the poem The German Rhine by Nicholas Becker captured the burgeoning nationalistic fervor of the time. The idea of national unification was gaining traction among the populace, culminating in the Revolution of 1848, which spread rapidly from France to the German states. In March of that year, uprisings erupted in Berlin, Vienna, and across various cities, compelling rulers to make concessions. Liberal governments were formed, constitutions were promised, censorship was lifted, and political freedoms were expanded. A significant milestone of this revolution was the convening of the Frankfurt National Assembly, the first parliament representing all German states, elected by universal, albeit indirect, male suffrage. The assembly met in St. Paul's Church in Frankfurt from May 1848 to June 1849. Imagine Frankfurt during this period, its skies filled with the black-red-gold flags symbolizing unity and freedom. The streets buzzed with lively discussions about the latest political developments. Within St. Paul's Church, transformed into a parliamentary chamber, heated debates unfolded regarding the future structure of Germany. The assembly faced formidable challenges as it sought to draft a constitution for a united Germany. Difficult questions arose. What should be the boundaries of this new state? Should the multi-ethnic Austrian Empire be incorporated in its entirety, or only its German-speaking territories? Or should Austria remain outside the new Germany altogether? Should the country adopt a monarchical or a republican system? If it were to be a monarchy, who would be its ruler? After extensive deliberations, the majority of delegates leaned toward the small German solution, which proposed unification without Austria, positioning Prussia as the leading power. In March 1849, the imperial crown was offered to King Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia. However, he disdainfully declined, believing that the crown should come from monarchs rather than the people, famously referring to it as a crown made of dirt and clay. His refusal marked the beginning of the end for the revolution. By the summer of 1849, the old order had reasserted itself across the German states, often with the assistance of military force. The last bastions of resistance in Baden and Palatinate were crushed by the Prussian army. Many revolutionaries were forced into exile, seeking refuge in Switzerland, France, Belgium, or the United States. It appeared as though the revolution had completely failed, yet its long-term implications were significant. The idea of national unity could no longer be suppressed in the public consciousness. The Prussian constitution, despite being quite conservative, still introduced representative governance. The peasant reform that liberated serfs from the remnants of feudal obligations was completed, laying the groundwork for future unification, achieved not through revolution, but through diplomacy and military action. The 1850s, often referred to as the era of reaction, were characterized by the suppression of liberal and national movements. Nevertheless, economic development continued unabated. Industrialization accelerated, particularly in Prussia, where the Ruhr area was transforming into Europe's leading industrial hub. New railroads were constructed, joint stock companies emerged, and the banking system evolved. As tensions simmered between Austria and Prussia over leadership in the German sphere, Austria sought to regain its influence in Germany after suffering defeat in the war against France and Sardinia in 1859, which had cost it Lombardy. Meanwhile, Prussia, economically more advanced yet still regarded as a secondary power politically, prepared for an inevitable showdown. In the year 1861, Wilhelm I ascended to the Prussian throne with a firm resolve to strengthen the military. When the liberal majority in the Prussian parliament refused to approve military reforms, a constitutional crisis ensued. To navigate this impasse, Wilhelm appointed Otto von Bismarck as prime minister, a man destined to become the architect of German unification. Bismarck is one of the most controversial figures in German history. Although he held conservative beliefs, he was a pragmatist willing to employ any means necessary to achieve his goals. Great questions of the time are decided not by speeches and majority votes, but by iron and blood, he proclaimed in his famous address to the Budget Committee of the Prussian Parliament. Disregarding parliamentary opposition, Bismarck pushed through military reform, He reorganized the Prussian army, transforming it into the most formidable military force on the continent. At the same time, he skillfully navigated complex diplomatic waters, isolating Austria, and securing the benevolent neutrality of other major powers. The first step toward German unification came with the war against Denmark in 1864. Prussia and Austria joined forces to wrest the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein from Denmark. However, soon after the victory, tensions arose between the Allies over the spoils. Bismarck, having secured French neutrality and an alliance with Italy, provoked a conflict with Austria. In June 1866, the Austro-Prussian War erupted, a conflict known among Germans as the Brothers' War. Despite Austria's support from numerous German states, Prussia, aided by its superior military and railway network, quickly achieved a decisive victory. The critical battle occurred at Königgrätz, or Sadowa, in Bohemia, where the Austrian forces were thoroughly defeated. The subsequent Treaty of Prague effectively excluded Austria from German affairs. The northern German states united under the banner of the North German Confederation, led by Prussia. The southern German states, Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, and Hesse, retained their independence but formed military alliances with Prussia. The North German Confederation was structured as a federation with a strong central authority. Its constitution, crafted by Bismarck, established a bicameral parliament, the Bundesrat, representing the governments of member states. As we reflect on this seismic shift in German history, we begin to see how the threads of revolution, warfare, and political maneuvering came together to shape a nation. The legacy of these events would resonate for generations to come, laying the groundwork for the Germany we know today. What if I told you that a single diplomatic maneuver by Otto von Bismarck reshaped the entire landscape of Europe? How did the ambitions of a Prussian king and the machinations of a cunning chancellor lead to the birth of a powerful German empire? And how did this transformation ignite fears in the heart of France? Join me on a journey through time as we explore the dramatic events that unfolded during the unification of Germany, a saga marked by war, triumph, and the complex interplay of power. The Reichstag, elected by universal male suffrage, marked a new political dawn as the Prussian king took on the role of President of the Union, while Bismarck served as federal chancellor. The unification of Germany sent shockwaves through France under the rule of Napoleon III, who viewed the emergence of a formidable state on its eastern borders with trepidation. In Bismarck's mind, war with France was not just an option. It was a necessary step to solidify the unification of Germany, a move that would unite the southern German states with their northern counterparts. In a masterstroke of diplomatic manipulation, Bismarck conjured the famous Ems dispatch, a clever piece of correspondence designed to provoke France into declaring war in July of 1870. Southern German states, bound by military alliances with Prussia, joined the conflict, rallying to support their northern brethren. The German armies swiftly overpowered the French forces in a series of border skirmishes, culminating in the encirclement of the French army in Sedan, where Emperor Napoleon III himself was taken prisoner. As news of victory reached Berlin, jubilant crowds flooded the streets, ringing church bells and waving black, red, and gold flags high in celebration. Similar scenes erupted in Munich, Dresden, Hamburg, and other cities across the newly united Germany. Amidst the revelry stood Bismarck, clad in the uniform of a cuirassier, reading the proclamation of the empire's foundation. This was not merely a victory of arms, but a triumph of Bismarck's diplomatic acumen. The proclamation at Versailles symbolically marked the conclusion of Germany's unification, achieved through iron and blood, just as Bismarck had predicted. What emerged in place of numerous fragmented states was a powerful empire, centrally positioned in Europe. This new Germany was united by a shared language, culture, and national consciousness, yet it still exhibited significant regional variations and traditions. The constitution of the newly formed empire largely echoed that of the North German Confederation, creating a federal state with a strong central authority. The German Empire encompassed 25 states, including 4 kingdoms: Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, and Württemberg, and the imperial territory of Alsace-Lorraine, which had been annexed from France. Notably, the Prussian king automatically ascended to the title of German Emperor, while the Prussian Prime Minister served as Imperial Chancellor. However, this empire was far from a democracy in the contemporary sense. The executive power was not beholden to a parliamentary majority. The Reichstag, while elected by universal male suffrage, possessed limited authority, especially concerning military budgets and foreign policy. The chancellor was accountable only to the emperor, not to the parliament. This political structure mirrored the societal hierarchy of Germany at the time, where the old aristocracy, particularly the Prussian Junkers, maintained dominant positions in the military, diplomacy, and high bureaucracy. Meanwhile, the burgeoning bourgeoisie, economically powerful yet politically marginalized, found themselves sidelined. The working class, growing in numbers due to industrialization, was just beginning to organize politically. Yet, despite these internal disparities, the unification of Germany represented a monumental achievement, fulfilling the deep-seated aspirations of the German people. This process, which had begun in the Napoleonic era, continued through the Revolution of 1848, and was ultimately realized by Bismarck's strategic maneuvering. For centuries, Germany had been fragmented into countless states, but it had finally achieved national unity, even without Austria. A significant portion of the German-speaking population remained within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, excluded from the newly established German Empire. In the ensuing decade, Germany transformed into a formidable industrial power, competing with Great Britain for economic supremacy in Europe. German science, technology, education, and culture reached unprecedented heights. However, alongside this progress, internal and external contradictions began to mount, setting the stage for the 2 world wars of the 20th century. The path from the Holy Roman Empire to a national state was winding and intricate, taking over 1,000 years and encompassing periods of flourishing and decline, moments of glory and tragedy, years of warfare and peaceful construction. This journey irrevocably altered the face of Europe and the world. As we reflect on this historical odyssey, we must consider the lessons it offers us today. Perhaps the most significant takeaway is the dialectical relationship between unity and diversity. The German world has always balanced these 2 poles, the desire for cohesion and the preservation of regional distinctiveness. Even in times of extreme political fragmentation, cultural unity prevailed, rooted in a common language and shared traditions. Conversely, even after political unification, deep regional differences persisted. Another vital lesson is the impact of external influences on the formation of national identity. The struggle against Napoleonic France became a powerful catalyst for the development of German national consciousness. The shared threat and common struggle galvanized the German people more than a century of peaceful coexistence ever could. Finally, Germany's history illustrates the complex interplay of idealism and realism in politics. The ideals of national unity and freedom, championed by intellectuals and embraced by the masses, were ultimately realized through the pragmatic and often cynical approaches of Bismarck, who wielded diplomacy and war as tools of statecraft. Today, As we gaze upon modern Germany, a democratic, prosperous, and peaceful nation in the heart of a united Europe, it is hard to fathom the trials and transformations it has endured. Yet it is precisely this intricate history, with all its rises and falls, that has shaped the national character and political culture we witness today. History is never static. It continues to evolve, and we are all participants in its ongoing narrative. By studying the past, we enhance our understanding of the present and can more consciously build our future. I hope this journey through the centuries of German history has proven to be not only enlightening, but also inspiring. Share your thoughts on potential topics for new stories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Quiet History and give a thumbs up.